my wife texted me that they said the baby was going to die. The doctor said, not compatible with life was the phrase she put. And I found myself in this strange position where I am literally writing books to try and help people find peace. And my life just got turned upside down.
It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Doug Bender, and we're going to be discussing his new book, I Choose Peace, Raw Stories of Real People Finding Contentment and Happiness. Doug, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Well, let's kick off our conversation with a bit of what you might call the Doug Bender origin story. For those encountering you for the very first time in our talk today, what are a few things they should know about you?
Well, I'm one that loves a good hobby. So I have a new hobby every month or so. Currently, my new hobby is the newest baby we just had. So we now have 4 kids, and my hobby is largely hanging out with my kids. But I also have a few chickens, some sheep, and a small flock of ducks. And we have lots of fun with our animals.
You're in Texas, right?
Well, I used to live in Texas, and I've recently moved up towards where my wife grew up in the Pittsburgh area.
Okay. Well, it seems all the people I know in Texas have lots of animals for whatever reason. I don't know why.
They love their cows down there.
Well, I can relate. We actually have a new baby who is about 10, 11 weeks old. So that is a busy hobby of mine. I have no animals other than a dog, although I do have 10 kids, and 10 kids do keep us very busy around here. So
yes, that would.
Let's get into sort of the story behind the story. You work with, I don't even know, what do we call it? A ministry, a media outlet called I Am Second. I know a lot of the listeners are going to be very familiar with that, but it's inevitable that there are some folks that listen to the podcast that just have not ever encountered I Am Second. So would love to have you tell us just a bit about what is it and what sorts of content might people encounter if they go to the site at iamsecond.com.
At the very core of who we are, we tell people's story. So people who have found God, that's the story we're telling. And these people come from all different walks of life. Some of them are famous, some of them are not. Some of them are in the arts or business or stay-at-home moms. But each of them have this fantastic story of how Jesus became first in their life. And so we tell this story on the web, via film, blog, and even in written content with our books, and trying to inspire people to consider a life where Jesus is first.
Well, next, let's get into the story behind the book. So this is the 3rd book that you all are releasing through I Am Second. Would love to hear a bit about what moved you in the direction of writing I Choose Peace. And if it only accomplishes one thing, what do you most hope that is?
We decided to write this book because, well, there's a lot of reasons, but one of which is that when we look through our films, we have over 130 films on our website, and we see people again and again searching for peace. Whenever we interact with them on Facebook or social media, they're looking for answers there. And we have so many awesome stories that speak into that. And we said, let's create a resource where we tell these stories in one place that answer that question of how do I find peace? What is this peace I can have? And additionally, with these films on our website, usually they're 7 or 8 minutes or so, but in a book, we can go a lot deeper into that. And so you get a lot more content in our book in these stories.
Well, if you had to put on your big theologian's hat this afternoon, why do you feel the message of peace that you share in the book, why is that so important for today's culture? If anything, it seems like everybody around us is chasing after everything but peace.
It's interesting with peace. You look at our culture, and anxiety is one of the pressing issues facing everybody. As I was researching for the book, we discovered that 1 in 3 Americans will at some time in their life deal with an anxiety disorder. And that just tells me that there are literally tens of millions of people who don't even know oftentimes what is causing this anxiety. And they'll go about it trying to solve that issue with a whole lot of things. Maybe they'll try self-medicating, or they'll try relationships, or they'll try success at work. But we feel like we really have an answer for folks, a place where you can find true and lasting peace. And that's by putting Jesus first in their life. So we wanted to address a pressing issue that so many of people here in the country face, but so few actually feel like they know how to address it. And so that's really kind of the motivation behind it all.
More often than not, we can tell people facts and we can try to encourage them through information, but it's stories that we connect with. It's stories that really seem to give us hope, that allow us to feel like, well, man, if that person experienced change, that person experienced breakthrough, there's an opportunity for me to do that as well. Would love to have you just tell us about a few of the interesting people whose stories we're going to encounter in the book. Who are some of the people that we will find in the pages of I Choose Peace?
Well, there's a lot of stories in there. We have stories from Kathy Lee Gifford from The Morning Show. We have Chip and Joanna Gaines from HDTV. One of my favorites is Brian Welch, who's a guitarist in Korn. Not your typical Christian band or anything, but his story is a fascinating one. And we've actually caught his story twice. When we first interviewed him, it was nearly a decade ago, and he had just left Korn and decided to go follow Jesus. And what happened after that was pretty much every aspect of his life started to fall apart. And he realized that when you come to Jesus, you don't get everything on day one. God puts you on this journey. And so in this book, we were able to kind of capture what happened next. What happens when a rock star comes to Jesus and then life doesn't work out? And his story is very typical to the kinds of stories we have in this book. Is he learned that God put him on this path that slowly chipped away all the things that were stealing peace in his life. And it was a decade-long process. And he'll tell you he's still in that process. But that's the kind of story we tell over and over again in the book.
At the end of the book, you actually share part of your own story. I would love to have you talk to us a bit about, like, what did those experiences teach you about peace?
Yeah, it's interesting. The day my second book was actually due to the publisher, my wife had a doctor's appointment. She was pregnant with our second child. And I didn't make it to that sonogram because I had a book due that day. And I said, I just can't make it. So I'm working on that deadline. And my wife texts me that they said the baby was going to die. The doctor said, not compatible with life was the phrase she put. And I found myself in this strange position where I am literally writing books to try and help people find peace. And my life just got turned upside down. And that's actually the story I conclude this book with, is my own journey to discovering peace and that process that God puts us all on when things in life don't work according to our own plans. And what does that look like? How do you trust God in those moments? And that was a trying moment for my own life, my own faith, but one that I am stronger for having gone through. And that's the story I share there.
Thanks for being brave. Thanks for putting yourself out there. I feel like it's one thing to be like, oh, look at all these famous people sharing their stories, and to not have you share your story when you have something important that people are going to connect with. People would be missing out. So I just appreciate that you did that.
You know, in the first book, I opted not to share my story. But when I got to this one, I said, I feel like when I look at these stories of how these people found peace, I have my own journey that I think could really help people. And I found that sometimes those big famous names, some of the ones I already mentioned were the ones that kind of get people to open up the book. But the stories that really connect are the everyday ones, the ones that you don't necessarily recognize the names, but not all of us can be a rock star. So it's a fun story to read, but it's hard to relate to sometimes. And so we have that mix. And I put myself in the ordinary person category. So, yeah.
As a guy who works in the Christian publishing space, I look at a project like I Choose Peace, and I realize it's a very unique project. You get to be kind of a biographer, maybe even part anthropologist. I'm curious to find out, what were the stories in the book that were difficult for you to piece together and represent? Because it's not always easy to take something that was captured on film or on video and put it in print. Any interesting challenges in that process?
One of the people we feature in the book is Shaun Johnson, who is an Olympic gymnast. And I found myself having to figure out how gymnastics work. And great story, but I was like, so she's talking about scoring and the moves she was doing. And in a lot of ways, even just being a female, her story was very different than mine. And so it was a fascinating process having to hear her, understand her story, see it from her perspective, and even just understand her profession, gymnastics. How does that work? What are you talking about? There was no more than one time I had to get clarification on, so what is that exactly? So That was one of those stories that there was some extra research to figure out, but I really enjoyed the process of learning her story and seeing it, the things that God put her through. Especially one of the things with hers is she won silver and she wanted to win gold. And that just kind of really rocked her. So understanding, like, how does that rock a person to win silver? But listening to her, it was actually quite moving.
Doug, let's say a reader picks up the book, they get to that last page, they close that back flap. What's the message you hope they've heard loud and clear throughout the pages of the book? What's the one thing you want to make sure every single person walks away with?
Number one, that peace is something we can all have. It's not just something you get by accident. It's not something that just a few people who happen to have a lucky situation in life. Peace is something that Jesus offers all of us. And he paid whatever price that peace requires. It's yours for the taking. And when you put Jesus first in your life, that is one of the rewards he begins to build in your life. And it can be a trying and a challenging path, but the reward of peace in the midst of it all is the thing that I hope everybody gets by the end of that. And that's even why we have such a diverse cast of stories in this, people from so many walks of life. The reason for that is because no matter where you're from, peace is still something you can choose.
And Doug, where can the listeners go online to connect with you and find out more about the book?
You can go to ichoosepeacebook.com and find out all about the book, where you can get it, learn more about our movement, I'm Second. Encourage everyone to check that out.
All right, and like we do with every episode, we'll have detailed links in the show notes, places where you can connect with Doug and pick up your own copy of the book. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Doug Bender. Once again, our book today was I Choose Peace, Raw Stories of Real People Finding Contentment and Happiness. For more on the book, a great place to start is the book's website. Once again, you can find that over at ichoosepeacebook.com. And Doug, I just want to say thanks so much for sharing with us today. It's been a great pleasure and an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.